On China, U.S. lawmakers are examining the role Beijing played in the spread of coronavirus. We're on Capitol Hill. Global pandemic. The head of ACI Africa tells us how COVID-19 is affecting that continent. Christ on the cross. Pope Francis has two suggestions for how the faithful, even in quarantine, can remain close to God during Holy Week. And a real miracle. The former president of EWTN News tells us how he and his wife were infected and recovered from the deadly coronavirus. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, April 8th, 2020. Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable reporting for home as we continue to cover COVID-19. Senator Bernie Sanders drops out of the race for the White House. We'll discuss that in just a few minutes, but we start tonight with the coronavirus pandemic. The White House task force warns people not to violate social distancing guidelines because if they do, it could spark a second wave of sickness. Correspondent Owen Jensen reports now from the White House. Owen.
Tracy, here at the White House, as they battle the coronavirus, they're trying to figure out a way to get people back to work. The concern tonight is if you do that too soon, you risk another disaster.
As the virus rages on the front lines, President Donald Trump offers his support to those taking the brunt of the assault.
Today we continue to send our love to the great people of New York and New Jersey. We support them fully. We grieve alongside every family who has lost a precious loved one.
The president asking Americans to hang tough for a while longer so we can beat the virus.
And for the next week, hopefully not much longer than that, it's going to start to go in the other direction.
The mayor of New York City also calling on people not to let their guard down.
The social distancing, the shelter in place is working. We got to stick to it to make sure we really defeat the coronavirus and to absolutely be careful it doesn't rebound back on us.
Still, more victims, more pain. One family lost their 27-year-old daughter.
It just went through her body so fast. By the time she got to the hospital, she fell out and was unconscious and put into ICU. And the next thing I know, she was intubated. You know, she coded in my arms.
The U.S. and other nations are trying to envision an exit strategy of how and when to ease the restrictions. And in the midst of the White House response, another change in staff. Kayleigh McEnany, the Trump campaign spokesperson, will take over as press secretary. And Alyssa Farah, the vice president's former press secretary, will return to the White House as strategic communications director. The additions come after Stephanie Grisham transferred back to the First Lady's office in an announcement made yesterday.
Over 400,000 Americans have been infected by the coronavirus. Nearly 14,000 have died. GM is producing 30,000 ventilators for the U.S. at cost, and Starbucks is giving direct payments to employees worldwide. Tracy?
Correspondent Owen Jensen reporting from the White House for us tonight. Thank you, Owen. Our calls to hold the Chinese government accountable for the COVID-19 pandemic are growing louder, especially as many countries continue to face prolonged lockdowns with no end in sight. In Washington, U.S. lawmakers are considering action. Correspondent Eric Rosales reports from Capitol Hill. Eric?
Well, Tracy, bottom line, Chinese government failed to say anything about this pandemic inside their country, even though their own people were dying. A recent study by the University of Southampton shows that had the Chinese government told world leaders just 3 weeks earlier, 95% fewer cases of coronavirus would take place throughout the world. So the big question is, how do we punish these Chinese officials?
Because of China's secrecy and its deceit, this became a pandemic.
Asia policy expert Gordon Chang says the United States should trust nothing the Chinese government says about the coronavirus. The communist regime lifted the lockdown in Wuhan, a city of 11 million where the pandemic began. Wuhan reported more than 82,000 virus cases and over 3,300 deaths.
When we look at what Chinese leaders did from about the second week in December to January 20, we can see that they not only tried to keep this epidemic secret, which of course would be bad enough, but they also tried to deceive the world on a critical point. on whether this disease could be passed on from one human to the next.
Chang says the U.S. and other countries should consider seizing China's assets.
We hold $1 trillion of their treasury obligations. That's something that we can take.
Today, a spokesman for the Chinese government denied they concealed information on the pandemic and urged further U.S.-China cooperation. This morning, Congressman Ted Yoho of Florida told me he disagrees.
It does appear like there is a cover-up.
He's the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, which held the first congressional hearing on the outbreak on February 5th.
I think there's going to be a wake-up call from this pandemic where our suppliers and the American consumers are going to demand a diversification.
The congressman says that China should already be facing tough economic sanctions for its human rights violations against Catholics and other Christians. Many of them are in prison camps. He says that he's working now with his committee to possibly bring new sanctions against China. Tracy?
Eric, thank you. Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting from Capitol Hill. My next guests know firsthand the physical and emotional toll of COVID-19. At its diagnosis, it was just a little over 2 weeks ago when an urgent prayer request went out for our both former EWTN News president and COO Dan Burke and his wife Stephanie, director of the Avila Institute for Spiritual Formation, as they waged their personal battle against the potentially deadly virus. Dan and Stephanie Burke join me now by Skype. Thank you so much for being with me, and what a blessing to have you here.
Well, it's great to be here.
Thank you.
Dan, I want to start with you. I know that you were really concerned about getting this virus because of your health challenges, specifically with your lungs. When you first started experiencing the symptoms of COVID-19, what was it like and what was going through your mind?
Well, I was already having difficulty breathing just because of normal issues. And I began to have flu-like symptoms. And of course, I was concerned because I told my son several weeks earlier that if I got the virus, I didn't think I would survive.
That was really unbelievable. And Stephanie, I know that you were sick as well. What a trying time for you knowing Dan's situation and that it could be dire. And you also had the virus. What was it like for you as a wife and a mother?
It was a scary time. You know, there was a lot of angst because of his lung disease. And when we realized that we were most likely infected with it, we knew it was going to be serious. In the beginning, you know, I had a little harder time. We thought he was doing well because of all of his asthma medication and his treatments, and then it quickly turned south, and he had to be not only hospitalized, but he went straight into the ICU, and within just a few hours of going into ICU, he had to be intubated. It was incredibly scary.
I bet. And Dan, I want to go back to you. I know you shared that you finished your will on the way to the hospital, which is hard for anyone to imagine. And then you were in intensive care on a ventilator. Can you talk about that time and the emotions that you were experiencing then?
I've been in the hospital more times than I can count. I've had more surgeries than I can count. And I've never experienced anything like this, honestly. There was a spiritual darkness that was overwhelming, as well as the physical challenges. And this has been by far the most difficult hospitalization and illness I've ever faced.
And Stephanie, I know during this time you were at home in isolation and you weren't able to be with Dan physically then. What was it like for you?
Well, there was a moment when we were at the hospital that I realized that we were going to have to be separated, and we didn't know if we were going to see each other again. It was that dire. And so, you know, I heard a sense somehow interiorly, I heard 3 days. And I had some sort of idea or some sort of comfort that this was like our passion, that this was our Calvary that we were entering into. And I held on to that, you know, and I had to come home. I was alone. I was isolated here. I couldn't see him because he was so grave. And I just really spent my time in prayer and supplication and surrender to the Lord and waited in the silence and in my own illness, struggling with that, offering that up, waiting to get word from the doctors that he was going to be okay. But it was a full 3 days, and at the end of those 3 days, they called me to let me know that he was off the ventilator, and he was breathing on his own. And it's truly a miracle, and I think a testimony to intercessory prayer.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was what I was going to ask you both this last question, because we all know the power of prayer is like no other. And we here at EWTN and many of the faithful have been praying for you both. Can you talk about that, what that means to you and your family, and what it's been like spiritually, again, to go through all of this?
I think that's really, frankly, what got me through, what allowed me to survive, was the people of God cooperating with God and asking for his mercy. And in my case, the mercy God gave me was to give me more time. Doesn't always work out that way, but we're grateful for those prayers. And I want to also say we're deeply grateful for all the medical care workers out there who are putting their lives at risk every day. And so there's a lot to be thankful for from the medical community, from the Christian and Catholic communities that prayed for me and for us, and really gave us the strength to make it through and to recover.
Stephanie, anything you'd like to share?
I just want to say, that, you know, this is a moment of hope. And for those that are struggling, you know, we certainly have a greater compassion for all the people all over the world that not only through this pandemic, but often find themselves without the sacraments, without priestly care, with not being able to practice their faith, or isolation, or not able to get proper medical care. You know, if it's this pandemic or anything else, we need to understand that the Lord hears our prayers, and that when we draw together and we call out to the Lord, that he hasn't abandoned his people. And that we continue to draw together in strength and prayer for all those that are suffering, and how grateful we are for everyone who prayed for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dan and Stephanie. Dan and Stephanie Burke, again, we are so grateful to you for sharing your story with us, and we do continue to pray for you both in your recovery. Thank you.
Thank you.
In Iran, 121 people died yesterday from COVID-19. Health officials say the death toll is now almost 4,000, and the number of cases of the virus in Iran is now up to 65,000. But Iran says more people are surviving and leaving hospitals. Iran has the most severe outbreak in the Middle East. New drone video shows the streets of Tokyo have a lot less cars during rush hour. Streets are usually packed with people getting to work and jammed with cars, but only a few commuters can be seen. Just yesterday, a state of emergency was declared in some places, but it is only a request to stay home, not an order. The coronavirus has hit 52 African countries, leading to 500 deaths. There are more than 10,000 positive cases across the continent. Places like Zimbabwe are on lockdown and food markets are open. But some say there is a shortage of basic commodities. Police have been using water cannons to spray disinfectant at public places, including bus terminals. Joining us now on Skype from Nairobi, Kenya, is Father Don Bosco Onyalla, the editor-in-chief of ACI Africa. Father Don, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tracy.
Well, many around the world are taking measures such as social distancing, they're wearing masks, and also working from home. What's the situation like in Africa as the coronavirus spreads?
Well, the measures being taken seem to be coming from the World Health Organization, and so Africa, as diverse as it is doing the same. The same measures being applied in the rest of the world are being applied in Africa. Social distancing, working from home, the government taking precautionary measures, prevention. And so some have imposed lockdowns in some cities. Some have had a dusk to dawn curfew, like here in Kenya, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. But it is about the impact of these measures on the ordinary people, who most of them rely on hand to mouth. they rely on what they make for each day to survive. And so many are being affected negatively by these measures.
Father Don, what's been the reaction of the Catholic Church leaders in Africa?
Church leaders in Africa have had to comply. And so masses, public worship has been suspended. And so it is a very quiet Easter week, Holy Week. And many church leaders have resorted to streaming live services. And so some have partnered with television stations that are of national outreach to broadcast services, especially on a Sunday like Palm Sunday. Others have resorted to social media. And it is a new reality for many Catholics and Christians and worshippers across the continent.
Father Don, you touched on streaming services and other things. How else are Catholics preparing for Easter this year?
It is really a family thing now. Previously, it would be planning to go to church and having a vigil mass and having gatherings that people celebrate, sing together. Right now, the church has to be in the family. And so there has been a promotion of realizing that, well, the physical buildings are closed, but actually each person is a church. And so they are promoting family prayer. There have also been orientations towards if you are following Mass from an online streaming television or social media, how do you prepare as a family? So coming together and preparing a table, lighting a candle, so that it's not just watching a movie, but being in solidarity with those that you are viewing from the screen, whether it's a television or a computer.
Well, Father Don, thank you so much for your time and also your insight. Father Don Bosco Onyalla, Editor-in-Chief of ACI Africa. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me, and keep safe.
Pope Francis prays for the conversion of those who exploit the needy during the pandemic.
Gesù ha detto non si può servire Dio e il denaro. Due signori.
At his daily mass in the Vatican, the Holy Father said we can't serve both God and money. When serving God, we are free in adoration and service. When serving money, we are a slave to money. Pope Francis has created a commission of experts to study the female diaconate. The 10-member group includes 5 women. In February, Pope Francis called for women in the South American region to be included in new forms of service in the church, but not within the ordained ministries of the permanent diaconate of priesthood. Coming up, Senator Bernie Sanders drops out of the race for the White House. And Catholic schools are closed, so how are they handling teaching online? Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders announced today that he is giving up his run for the White House.
If I believed we had a feasible path to the nomination, I would certainly continue the campaign, but it's just not there. I know that there may be
The decision leaves former Vice President Joe Biden as the presumptive Democratic nominee. Senator Sanders is not endorsing Joe Biden, but promises to work with him. The senator initially exceeded sky-high expectations about his ability to recreate the magic of his 2016 presidential bid, but was not able to turn that into a viable path to the nomination. With schools closed around the world to stop the spread of the coronavirus, students and in many cases their parents have had to quickly make the transition to some form of online learning. Joining me now on Skype to talk about how families of children in Catholic schools can preserve the Catholic identity in distance learning is Patrick Reilly, president and founder of the Cardinal Newman Society. Patrick, welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tracy. Great to be with you again.
So we talked about the unique advantages that a Catholic school education brings. How can you tell us, how can Catholic educators restructuring their lessons now that students are working from home?
Well, of course, Catholic education can never end, right? Our young people need it. It's the vocation of parents. It's the mission of the church to teach the nations. And so our Catholic schools are moving forward, and I'm really excited about how they've been doing that. Thank God for the technological ability that we have to maintain something of the special Christian community of Catholic schools. They're doing a lot of work online, sending work home, and then parents are becoming deeply engaged with the education as well, and that seems to be working just fine.
Can we talk about that, the parents? How can they best support their children academically? Because it can be hard at times.
It sure can. It's actually a great opportunity for parents to really become engaged with the students' education at a level that maybe they weren't before. To have great discussions, conversations, sit alongside your son or daughter and work through problems together, and have those discussions about how our faith integrates with everything that they're studying. Talk about the literature, the books that they're reading, and just really show how important education is to us as parents as much as it is to their teachers.
Patrick, this is also a trying time emotionally for all of the faithful who are going to miss Mass. How can parents play a more active role and continue to strengthen their children's faith at home?
Well, one of the great strengths of Catholic schools is that strong Catholic environment, just the artwork on the walls and the sacramental opportunities that students have at school. So parents can really work hard to provide as much of those opportunities. Maybe we can't actually go to our churches, but there are great opportunities to pray together, to start the habits that maybe we had fallen away from, and really engage with our young people in the faith.
Well, Patrick, thank you so much for your insight. We really appreciate it. Patrick Reilly, president and founder of the Cardinal Newman Society. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Up next, Pope Francis has a message for Holy Week. And during the deadly coronavirus pandemic, how one Catholic is using music to try and give people hope. Catholic musician Marie Miller has shared the stage with stars, signed a major record label, and even played for Pope Francis at the 2015 World Meeting of Families. And now she's released a new album that seems to be coming at just the right time. Correspondent Mark Irons has that story.
Marie Miller has done a lot in the last 5 years, but now she's excited about a brave new step.
I think being authentic is the best way as an artist, and I felt like I had never really done that.
So she left her Nashville label on a journey away from pop hits and closer to her musical roots. She's opened up a fresh yet familiar sound while she carries it down a completely new path.
I think I've just grown more mission-oriented.
It's that sense of mission that moved Marie to record her latest album, Little Dreams.
It was such a labor of love.
These are my little dreams. And it's already starting to make big waves. As of today, her song called Imaginary Friend has almost 775,000 listens on Apple Music. Imaginary Friend. The album, a raw, personal reflection stripped of big label expectations. And Marie tapped into a deep source of inspiration that has always been there, her Catholic faith.
I read John Paul II's letter to artists when I was 16 years old, and he talks about how beauty is a call to transcendence and that it stirs in us the hidden nostalgia for God. And when I read that, I just was changed forever. Don't look for God.
Her track titled Don't Look for God is all about finding true fulfillment in Him alone. She crafted this latest batch of songs by just being honest.
Not trying to make music that made sense for a particular format or a particular audience.
But it could be providence that Marie's album has been released at this particular time. We spoke to her a few weeks ago, right before calls for social distance and stay-at-home orders.
So I hope that this album also heals and inspires the listeners.
Marie's answer then, feeling so important now.
I want to dedicate my new song, Brave New Step, to all the incredibly brave healthcare workers.
She is currently planning a music video.
Take a picture and send it to me.
to thank frontline coronavirus fighters. Marie Miller, what she has to say may resonate with today's listeners.
I hope they feel less alone, less isolated. Music is a way for us to connect.
Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Mark, for that beautiful story. Pope Francis asked the faithful to ponder the cross during the Easter Triduum.
Non dimenticatevi, crocifisso e Vangelo.
At the Holy Father's weekly talk, he said this domestic liturgy we are living due to the pandemic should be lived with the crucifix and the Bible. Jesus' passion helps us go forward with trust and hope. Pope Francis invites us to meditate on God's love shown on the cross. And as we enter the holiest days of the church calendar, we will have a special Holy Week programming right here on EWTN. Through Easter, we will have the Pope's Masses and liturgies from Rome, as well as celebrations from around the world. To see the Holy Week schedule and highlights, just go to our website, EWTN.com/Lent. You'll also find Eucharistic adoration from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We hope you have a blessed Triduum. With a Holy Week programming, EWTN News Nightly will be back on Monday. Good night and God bless.